Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is April 17th, 2015, and Hillary Clinton has thrown her hat into the ring and is now officially declared herself candidate for the office of President of the United States. And this of course means that the Clinton dynasty would be carried on with Bill Clinton as the not the second in command, but the first husband in the White House. Would be the first time this kind of thing has happened. And to me, of course, the prospect is appalling. We have to take into account that the Clintons are an extremely power-hungry family. They operate using the lack of ethics that would be typically found in a very powerful political family, and they are completely ruthless. They are not shining examples of what we would like to see as a leadership role in the United States of America. This is what we desperately need. Unfortunately, the other major contender, Jeb Bush, is also very similar. He comes from another powerful political family. It would be a dynasty of even longer standing, because we have to remember the Bush family goes all the way back to Prescott Bush, the grandfather of Jeb Bush and George W. Bush. Prescott Bush being a member of the Senate and a very powerful financier before even World War II. This is in the late 30s. And what a catastrophe Prescott Bush and his friends almost perpetrated. They almost succeeded in bringing down this republic, the democratic nation that we try to be most of the time, in what was known as the business plot. Yes, it's true. You can look it up. It's called the business plot usually, but it was an effort to use the highly decorated Marine general from World War I and before, Smedley Butler, to replace the newly elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt and get rid of the democratic process and replace it with a fascist dictatorship. The industrialists, and Prescott Bush was among them, they admired fascism, they admired Hitler, they helped Hitler, they dealt with Hitler, they provided Hitler and Mussolini with funds. So they believed that this was the right thing, this was the future for Europe, and it could very well be a bright future for America. Well, not so much for America, but for them and their cronies, because fascism and business go together like bacon and eggs, at least from their point of view. You can get rid of your competition. It's like when the mafia gets control of the government and they run it as a business, a mafia business. So you eliminate the competition, you steal from your customers, you line your own pockets, you have kickbacks, you have every imaginable vice and criminal behavior going on. This is a typical fascist state. That's what they are. They're criminals. That's the long and short of it, ultimately. And they can get a lot done. They can help the people. And this is often the way a sociopath behaves. A sociopath will seduce you, will get your confidence, will do things for you, make your life better, ingratiate. That would be for the purpose of ingratiating himself into your trust, gaining your trust. They know how to play people. People are just suckers to a sociopath. They're just to be manipulated. They're sheep, and they are to be sheared like a sheep. And so this is Prescott Bush. And then we have Herbert Walker Bush, the son of Prescott Bush, getting involved in the assassination of President Kennedy, a lot of connections there. He was basically in charge of the kill team that took out JFK in Dallas in 1963. He's been located, a photograph of him has located him in the Dealey Plaza, and he's been fingered by top-ranking CIA officials. One in particular, E. Howard Hunt, was on his deathbed, or thought he was on his deathbed, and confessed to being there, to being part of it, and that Herbert Walker was the head honcho on the scene. Herbert Walker Bush, following in his father's footsteps of deposing presidents, starting to become a pattern. Then we have the son of Herbert Walker. Herbert Walker has a career in government. He's vice president. He's head of the CIA. He is president. And when he's vice president, under Reagan, they say that the vice presidency is really not a high-level position. But for George W. Walker, because of the health issues engendered, some believe, by the bullet that he took, supposedly, and by a young man who was actually his family were very close friends with the Bush family, interestingly enough. This is not just some nobody who shot Reagan. But from that moment on, during the recovery of Reagan, and he never really recovered, and then his gradual onset of Alzheimer's, and we don't know how that happened either, Herbert Walker Bush more and more took over the reins of power. So he had only one term as president, but he had at least one term as vice president in which he was essentially running the country, while Reagan was getting more and more incapable of doing his job. Then you have George W. Bush, who certainly one of the most insidious characters in all of American history. He was never really elected. Jeb Bush got him the presidency by using his influence of governor of Florida during that very tight moment in 2000 when George Bush was down to the wire with Al Gore. They were counting the votes, and then all of a sudden the vote counting stopped, and the election was just given to George W. Bush. And you all know if you're of a certain age, you know what happened. It was catastrophic for the country. It was catastrophic for the world. The world is still not recovered from the 8 years of rampant criminality under George W. Bush. And one of the most heinous acts, in my opinion, is the very probable murder of the son of JFK by George W. Bush. Because John Kennedy Jr., who was a little boy who famously saluted the hearse of his father as it went by, and they snapped a photo of him, this little tiny boy, about 3 or 4, grew up to be an extremely handsome, extremely charismatic, incredibly brilliant man. Like, he looked like a movie star or a model, or something. He ran a magazine, and he was more into education and entertainment and editing, publishing. He was a publisher, writing, publishing. So he didn't want to really get into that world, but he was thinking about it because there was a lot of pressure. He comes from a highly political family to try to get the Kennedy family back on track to run for office. And even before he could get started, because you absolutely know, if that man had announced that he was going to run for office, he would have become president unless someone stopped him. Because the American people still have such a love for the Kennedys, and especially for a guy like him, squeaky clean background, really, you like him. Just to see him, to hear him talk, you like him. So this guy was a huge threat. And then his plane goes down with his wife and his sister-in-law into Long Island Sound under very mysterious circumstances, straight down into the water. The instructor pilot that was with him was never found. The bodies were not found for quite a long time later. They pretended they didn't know where they were, even though they were clearly on radar and they knew exactly where they were the whole time. And so John Kennedy Jr., who might have turned this country around, is gone forever. And this is a tragedy. And there's a lot, and there is evidence. I haven't really gone into it with the viewers of this show, but there is evidence to suggest that George W. Bush was in charge of the operation that took out their longtime rival and enemy, who was a Kennedy. And so then now we have the second election of George W. Bush and 2004. The same shenanigans are going on. He's reelected, or is he? Again, it looks as if he didn't really get elected either time. They were pulling strings. They were pulling votes out of thin air. And he got his second term and was able to continue his ravaging of what is left of our Constitution and to kill many, many more people. The new President Obama now has not racked up as many deaths, thank God, but is pushing through the agenda that was started a long, long time ago. He's continuing on, and he is now about to he hopes, I hope this doesn't happen, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is about to be pushed through Congress under all kinds of pretenses and lots of secrecy. The people who are voting on it are not even allowed to read the entire treaty. And we don't even know what's in there. And the rumor is that much is going to happen as a result of this down the road that is not going to be good for the American people. It is a direct attack on sovereignty, and it is another step in the completion of the lock on freedom globally with the global governance system, which is being put into place, which will not be a democratic system, maybe on the surface a little bit, but in reality, no. Because the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And that's the rationalization. And so therefore, personal sovereignty, national sovereignty are gone, and all power rests in the hands of a small group of men, the emperors of the world. So let's look at a short segment from InfoWars, which delves into this question with David Knight, and then we'll get back and I will comment on it.
Tonight, Obama garners praise for his role in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And the BLM is up to their old tricks, this time in Oregon. That's next on the InfoWars Nightly News.
That manly culture, John Wayne and 707 horsepower cars, is coming back, and it threatens the New World Order and its culture that we've got 1776.
Well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is coming before the Senate in just a matter of days. Things are building to a head, and of course, we've been talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership as well as the Transatlantic Partnership for a long time here at InfoWars, talking about how this is the next step in global governance. But as Time Magazine points out, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, they say, will help to define Obama's legacy as a president. It is also going to define who these senators are that want to be president, especially the ones in the Republican Party. Senators like Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, and others will have to watch them very closely to see what they do with this fast-track treaty that is now coming before the Senate. Of course, we've seen details that have leaked out about the sovereignty-destroying aspects of this. Going back to NAFTA, you don't need to have a 1,000-page agreement if you want free trade. There's something else there when it's that large. And of course, this is an agreement that has been negotiated in secret by corporate lobbyists for many, many years. And our elected representatives have not been allowed to see it, or if they see it, they're not allowed to talk about it. And it's going to come before the Senate. They're going to have to, as part of the fast-track process, vote on it very quickly. They will not be allowed to offer any amendments. It'll be an up or down, take it or leave it, all at once. This, again, is going to be coming up in the next few days. Let's take a look, though, at NAFTA's legacy, because when Obama presented this to people, he said, of course, mistakes were made with NAFTA. We're not going to do that again. And yet he has many people in his close cabinet of economic advisors who wrote NAFTA. Let's look at what NAFTA has done for us. And of course, this is a bipartisan effort. It was Bill Clinton that claimed that NAFTA would create an export boom to Mexico. He said it would create 200,000 jobs in just 2 years. And remember, both Clinton and Bush number one were both in favor of NAFTA at the time. But what have we really seen? Not 200,000 new jobs in 2 years, but we have seen 682,000 jobs gone. 61% of those in manufacturing. And of course, other organizations like the Chamber of Commerce that want to promote this are telling us, well, look, we've had jobs created. They're not looking at the net number of jobs. They're just looking at jobs that were created by exports, not jobs that have been lost due to imports. Let's take a look at the deficit side of this. That's the other part of the economic news. Look at this chart from the same article. You can see that immediately after passage, we have the largest trade deficit the U.S. had ever seen, right after it, and it never got smaller. That trade deficit, that massive trade deficit, continued for a number of years, and then it grew. And for the last 14 years, we have had 14 record trade deficits. So it's not just a loss of income, which comes with a loss of jobs, but as we go into debt, there is a loss of wealth. And we can see that in terms of multinational corporations and foreign governments coming in and basically asking for our resources from our senators, who then turn it over to them. That's what we saw happening with the BLM, trying to do that in Nevada. We see that going on. John McCain has been successful in doing that in Arizona. We're going to be talking to someone at the end of the program where we see the end game being played with the miners in Oregon. But it's not just America. And of course, it's not really a failure. And it's not just about economics either. It would be a mistake to see this simply as an economic failure, as bad economic policy. No, it's doing precisely what it was designed to do. And the other part of this that mainstream media is not talking about is the loss of sovereignty. The fact that this is something that has been part of the long-term plan to create global governance by multinational corporations. You can see it very clearly now. We now see that as they've created these regional consolidations like NAFTA, like the EU, now they are consolidating those regions into a global governance. That's what the Trilateral Commission was all about. And again, that was Carter's chief of staff, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who created the Trilateral Commission. It was going to be North America, Europe, Asia, and that's where we see these trade agreements and now the consolidation. And so they're coming out of the closet telling us, oh yeah, NAFTA was about sovereignty all along, but don't worry, this is about simply trade. It's not simply about trade. We can see that's happening. We need to stand up en masse and take it down. And as I point out, it's not just here in America. This same thing is happening in Europe. people who are trying to renegotiate the treaty, the European Union treaty, especially those in the UK, are now seeing that even at this stage, the EU is saying they're not going to listen to the treaty, they're not going to abide by the process, the rules that have been set in place. We see the story from RT saying that Juncker doesn't have authority to delay the EU treaty changes, say Tories. Now, this is the guy who is the president of the European Union Commission. They say a growing number of bureaucrats oppose Prime Minister David Cameron of the UK. They oppose his demand for EU treaty renegotiation. They're fearful of a quiet democratic revolution that is coming out of the EU citizens' will to protect the sovereignty of their national parliaments. And so what they're going to do is they are going to delay this until they have time to consolidate this more. And as I pointed out, one of the Conservative Party members said treaty change is entirely a matter for the member states using the Commission as secretariat. They're saying he's asserting powers that he doesn't have. Isn't that interesting? We see that all the time, don't we? And yet, it was just a couple of weeks ago that we saw people like the head of PIMCO, the world's largest bond company, saying we were going to have a United States of Europe for this to work. That these defaults that were coming from Greece and others were going to break apart the European Union unless they asserted sovereignty. So you can see there again, it's not simply a trade agreement. It is not a free trade zone. This was always about creating a United States of Europe. Now the head of the bond company, the world's largest bond company, PIMCO, is saying it. We've also had Alan Greenspan saying exactly the same thing. So they're telling us where this is headed. This is clearly a case of international sovereignty being lost to these corporations. So we all need to stand up, pay very close attention to this, and pay attention to what the senators do, how they vote on this. That will tell you who really owns them or if they're their own man.
The knowledge of the ancients, tried
So,
and true, trusted.
That's it. And it really is interesting because they are moving forward on this into the 21st century exactly as they plan to do from the 20th century and talked about it and wrote it in their books, lectured about it, college courses, textbooks, you name it. Nothing new. We have known this has been coming, and now it really is coming. Now it really is here. We are going to have to deal with the situation in which Americans are losing their rights, just like the Europeans are losing their rights. Now, you heard David Knight talk about the European Union, that the free trade agreement was not working. The Eurozone is not working. And that really should be no surprise to anyone, because when they set up the European Union, and they gave all of the various countries a single currency, but they allowed them to keep their sovereignty, at least most of it, and be states, independent states, they knew that it could never work. Because when one state, one country does not have the economic strength to survive as a unit without being politically connected, then and when the rules say that another independent country or several other independent countries in the EU are obligated to help that country out financially, you can see that people are going to object. They're going to say, well, why should we help them out? They're a different country. They did it to themselves. The Greeks did it to themselves. They didn't pay their taxes. They didn't work hard enough. They're lazy. They made a lot of bad choices. They just squandered their money. They didn't save their money. And they're just having too good of a time down there in Greece with that wonderful Greek weather. On the Mediterranean, being laid back Greeks. And we Germans and we other Northern European people, we are not going to pay for it. We don't like it. And so this was expected. This was part of the plan. So what we have is a situation in which you have austerity and the Greeks don't like it. The Germans have to pay for it. They don't like it. And then the planners, the bureaucrats, say, you know what, this really is a bad situation, and we have a solution. And people are going, well, what? What's the solution? We need, they would say, a United States of Europe. In other words, you give up your sovereignty, so you're no longer countries, but you're more like states in the United States. You don't have the independence that you did before, and you give over your sovereignty to us in Brussels as a federal government who can basically tax and subsidize and do all of our business unimpeded by any national borders. So we do away with all the borders. And this would have the effect, they say, of allowing the money to flow, the wealth to flow back and forth, and then you have a situation in which the rising tide raises all boats, as long as the boats are in the same pond. It's like, well, the boats are now in individual ponds, and so they're not, when the tide goes up for one, it doesn't go up for everyone. They're separated. You put them all in the same pond, and then they all raise up together. The problem with that is that when they go down, they all go down together. Whereas in Greece, Greece went down. Greece went down, but the rest of them, if there had been no European Union, then Greece would have gone down, but no one else would have gone down because the borders act as a firewall. It prevents the fire of panic, financial panic, from spreading to other countries. You keep the borders secure, and you let in the people that you want to get into your country and keep out those you don't want, and you say how it goes. And also your leaders are in the country. They're not in Brussels, in Belgium. They're in your country. They're in Greece. And you can remove them. You are the Greek people, or you're the German people, or the French people, or the Dutch, the Netherlands, the Danish, all the members of the EU. If they have sovereignty, they can get their hands on criminal leadership if they want to. They're within their grasp. And when you give over your power, your personal sovereignty, your ability to deal with your own affairs, whether those would be something you enjoy doing or something you hate doing, but you still have to deal with it. When the responsibility is taken out of your hands, then you cannot reach those who are scourging you, who are robbing you, who are restricting you, who are causing you to suffer because they're not even in your country. You don't have control over your own life. And this is what people always have to consider. We have to understand that leadership will always want more power. It takes a very big man or woman to willingly give up power once they have it. Because the urge is to increase power. The system, for the systems manager, the integration of the systems into one much larger system is always better from their perspective. They don't see as a lot of independent systems, that's not efficient from their point of view. And they don't understand that when you're all interconnected like that you can all pull each other down. It used to be that in the 19th century, when people climbed mountains, they would all be roped together. A long line of climbers, each one connected to the next climber, to the next climber, to the next climber. And the idea was that if one climber fell, the others would support that climber and prevent him from falling. And they would work together as a team. Well, the problem was that if, like, that first climber at the highest point falls, then the guy below him can't hold him. He doesn't have the strength to hold the weight of a man falling, and it pulls him off. And then the two men, naturally, twice as much weight, pull the third guy off, and the fourth guy, and they all die. And this is the problem with this integrated systems. In a metaphor, the idea of a metaphor here is that instead of working together and helping, yeah, it's great when everything's going fine, but if you have a problem, then you really have a problem. Not just one, but it could be way worse. It's like the Titanic. It's just a bad idea. Integrating is not always a good idea. The Titanic. Now, an insensible construction of a ship. You have independent compartments, airtight independent compartments. I read somewhere that even the Chinese junk, which is a traditional large sailing vessel, that's very old, hundreds of years old, had compartments. And you could shut them down, and if you had a leak in one, you can shut them off. Well, the Titanic had compartments too, except there was only one problem. The walls of the compartments did not reach all the way to the ceiling. And so when it hit the iceberg, the water poured in and it spilled over the top of the compartment and went into the next compartment and filled that compartment up and then went into the next compartment until finally the whole ship sank. And this is just simply bad design. And this is why separation is better. It's not always better that everybody always, that everybody, let's say, hold hands around the world and sing Kumbaya. But in the old days, you would have privacy. You have rooms in the old houses. They were always made with doors. Doors always close everything off. Hallways, kitchen, living room, parlor, everything always had doors. So you could close that door, you could lock that door, and you could have your privacy. Now we have our leadership and the mainstream media, the state-run, controlled media, which is getting bigger and bigger and becoming more and more one single system with one source of news which does not contradict itself. It's a smoothly flowing narrative which extends all the way across the United States and all the way across the world, uninterrupted by contradictory news bites that it's not all that way, but that's why the alternative news is so important, because you have a different perspective. You get areas covered that were not covered by the mainstream. You have a different point of view. You might say, well, yeah, but the mainstream media covers the facts, and the alternative media covers opinions. Oh, really? Oh, really? Well, what are the facts have to be selected. There are lots of facts. If you select certain facts and you leave out certain other facts, that is the same thing as having an opinion, because you had to use your bias in order to select which facts to use and which facts to leave out. And I'll give you an example of that. You remember the Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman trial. George Zimmerman was an Hispanic American citizen who was on a neighborhood watch. He sees a young man acting, he thinks, acting suspiciously. The famous Skittles, he went to get the Skittles. And he was in a neighborhood where George Zimmerman thought he shouldn't be. And so he's in radio contact with his supervisor at the police department. And he says, well, I'm seeing a young man here, and he acting kind of strangely, kind of sneaking around. I'm going to follow him. And so the contact at the police department says, okay, I'll keep it, just let me know, and you keep me informed. I'll be here to be your backup and give you advice about what to do. Let's see if, we'll need to call in backup or whatever, but just keep your eye on him and see what he does. So George Zimmerman says, okay, he's walking down the street. Okay, so now he's looking over here and at this, and he's looking at that, and I think it's suspicious. And then he says, and he's black. Yeah, there's a kid here who looks kind of suspicious. He's black. And this was played over and over and over in the mainstream media. And people were saying, see, now George Zimmerman made a point of saying this kid is black. And that sort of proves that that is a strike against that kid. Oh, he's black. He's suspicious. But there was only one problem with that. The editors who had the transcript, who had the audio of the conversation of George Zimmerman with his the person at the police department, they cut out where George Zimmerman says, yeah, I'm following this young guy, he seems kind of suspicious to me. They cut out the part where the police person says, what color is he? And then George Zimmerman said, he's black. So that completely changes what George Zimmerman is saying by cutting out that simple question. And so it's much easier for people to say, George Zimmerman, racist. But he was answering the guy's question. What is that? Does that mean that George Zimmerman is a racist? No. But here's a very simple example about how things get changed. And was it an accident? Was it an oversight? Or was it a deliberate attempt to paint George Zimmerman as a racist? Even though he himself was Hispanic, he just happened to be an Hispanic guy with the name Zimmerman. I don't know why. It certainly looked like he was Hispanic. I think he was. Pretty sure he was. But anyway, just a small example. But this is how everyone has a certain amount of bias. So to say the alternative media is biased and the mainstream media is not biased is really unfair to the alternative media. And it's an attempt to label them as being somehow less legitimate. I keep hearing this over and over. It was, okay, what makes you legitimate? Oh, because you went to college and you took journalism? That makes you legitimate? I don't think that's what makes people legitimate. I think that we need to look at all sides. I had a friend of mine tell me, he says, this new journalism, all this alternative media, it's the Wild West now. It's not like when Walter Cronkite and Huntley Brinkley were out there. We had NBC, ABC, CBS to tell us in that forthright, straightforward way the facts, nothing but the facts. He said, nowadays it's the Wild West. And I said, I think it's better. I prefer the Wild West. Get it all out from all different perspectives. And we have this wonderful ability now for people to film on their iPhones, on their cell phones. And this has changed the landscape very much. It has made people more able to see for themselves how a particular event really happened, because they're not just told about it, but they can see it. But people have to be more independently minded and really think about things. I mean, you have to look more carefully, for instance, at that shooting of that black guy by the police officer in South Carolina. I have friends who looked at that, and the first time they saw that, they said, there's something wrong here. I mean, this guy is being shot in the back as he's running, but he's not reacting. He's not reacting until he reaches a point at the very last shot, and then finally goes like this and falls to his knees and then onto his stomach and lies there still on his stomach. Well, what about all the other times that he got shot? For one thing, we can, on our lovely flat screen TVs or computer screens, we can blow that picture up and get a good look at his back as he's running. Are you seeing any holes appearing in his jacket? Are you seeing any blood? Are you seeing any reaction? No, you were not. He's not even running that fast. And you would, because police officers now, pretty much across the board, use minimum 40 caliber bullets, and they use hollow points. And hollow points, you have a big fat bullet, and in the middle of that bullet, in the front, there's a hole. It's not a nice point like they used to have. There's a hole. It's a stubby looking bullet with a hole in the center. And what happens is, when you shoot that bullet, the air makes that soft metal expand a lot, so that when you hit somebody, flesh, with a hollow point bullet, you make a pretty big hole, way bigger than a 40 caliber bullet. And it's an ugly hole, and then out the front, it's even a bigger hole if it comes out the front, as they would with a powerful handgun, a 40 caliber Glock. And you see him, you shoot, and you don't even see any, he goes bang, bang, bang 8 times, and you don't even see any kick. Where's the kick? Where is the powerful kick of the gun, of a 40 caliber gun? They kick. Even a 38 caliber has a powerful kick. A 40 or 44 even has a bigger. These are not toys, but it looks like he's shooting a toy. And then, so just one 40 caliber hollow point bullet hitting you in the back, and buddy, if you don't go down, you're probably going to go down with one shot. And you're at very least going to react. Your body is going to be thrown off balance. You're going to show the impact. You're going to feel that impact, and your body's going to show it. And I have friends who immediately said that this is fake. They know, they understand what happens when someone gets shot. And they said, where's the bullet holes? Where's the reaction? And then he falls on the ground, drops to his knees, puts out one or both arms, lies on the ground on his stomach. The police officer actually looks at the camera, almost looks at the camera, close enough where it's almost a direct looking into the camera, leisurely walks over, looks at the guy, jogs back, gets the taser, takes the taser over, drops it by him. Another police officer walks up, feels his jugular vein, see if he's still alive. The guy tells him, "Oh, put your hands behind your back." The guy puts his hand behind his back. He cuffs him. Meanwhile, he's supposed to be dying. He's supposed to be dying. The other police officer actually pulls up the guy's shirt and the back. You can see his bare back. There's still no holes, still not one drop of blood. He's not quivering. He's not going into shock. He's not convulsing at all. We find out later that he was hit 5 times in the back and once in the ear. So 6 out of 8 shots he hit him, according to the account that we're supposed to believe. And people are going to say, well, what about the funeral? Well, what about his family? What about the fact that if he didn't really kill him, why would the police officer be arrested for murder? But you know what? Only the people who perpetrated this hoax, can answer all those questions because they perpetrated the hoax. They planned it. They thought of all the contingencies, all the directions that it could go, covering all their bases. They're the ones who came up with the whole narrative and figured out what to do. And they placed the guy with the camera there. And the police officer actually looks at the camera again when he's standing over Mr. Scott, Walter Scott. By the way, there's been a search online for Walter Scott. They can't find him. They think it's a fake name. I think it's fake. But the point is that people always ask me this, well, what about this? What about this? As if I'm supposed to have all the answers. I'm supposed to be able to solve the mystery. And if I can't solve the mystery, even though I wasn't there and I don't know anything about the details, then somehow my thesis that it was a hoax and a fake is weakened. It's weakened because, well, he doesn't know. What about this? How do you explain that? I can't. And I say I can't. I can't explain that. But why should I have to? I didn't do it. All that we have to see is the clear anomaly, the anomaly that makes all the details unimportant. Because how could it be? How could it be? How could 5 bullets enter a man's back, hollow points, .40 caliber, and have no blood, no dribble blood, no holes, I mean, people get torn apart by these .40 caliber bullets. Blood is exploding out of them in the front. You know, the entry wound is small. The exit wound is much bigger. It tears a hole, big hole. And this is like, this is enough to expose that it's phony, that it's not real. It doesn't matter that they had a funeral. It doesn't matter that they had people say that they were his relatives. I saw an interview with I ought to show this, an interview with his brother, 2 interviews with his brother. He has another guy with him on both sides. On one side, really close to him, touching him the whole time. And he is such a, his brother, guy playing the brother, sounds so false. His words, his explanations, his halting delivery, very stilted, really bad acting. And you might say, well, you know, he's really upset. No, he doesn't even sound really upset. Is he sad? Is he angry? No. He's doing a bad imitation of these sentiments that don't, and he's not even trying. He can't even remember his line. It's like he's trying to recite lines that he cannot remember very well. And he gets confused, he stumbles over himself, and it just doesn't come off as genuine. You know, people, we live our entire lives listening to people talk, dealing with people, having conversations, and you get an instinctive sense when we see something that sounds genuine and we see something that doesn't sound genuine. And we might see some terrible movie, you know, it's so fake. And that's the way it was. It was worse than a terrible movie. It was like the most ridiculous Ed Wood bad acting you could possibly imagine. I mean, it's like Ed Wood level, or worse, without being funny, without being inadvertently funny. But it's sad, is what it is. It's not funny. And the only plus that I can see to this is that, in my opinion, from what I've seen, I don't think that man who pretended to be Walter Scott is really dead. And that's a good thing, that he's not really dead. What is sad is that people are believing that he is dead and going through the traumatic reaction to seeing what they think is a cold-blooded murder by a police officer. I'm not saying that police officers don't murder people. I think they do. All I can say is that in my opinion, in this instance, he did not murder that guy. There's other things too. There was a guy that was with Walter Scott in the car. There's another video that takes place before they meet in the little park, and then Walter Scott runs from him and he gets shot, supposedly, where the car is pulled over because of a broken taillight. The police officer comes over and talks to him about the broken taillight, goes over to make his report in the car, and the surveillance video, or the cop video on the police car, is right there on the Mercedes that Walter is driving. There's another guy next to Walter, or someone, but that person, it's never explained. I've never read anything about who that person is. Never gets out of the car, just sits there. You can see him through the window, through the back window. So then Walter Scott just opens up the car door and runs off. He runs off to be killed, to his date with destiny. And there is the bystander just happens to be there, and the police officers are very close to this bystander who's filming it, but they never notice him, even though their heads turn, and you can see that they're clearly looking at the guy, checking him out, maybe not with their full direct eye contact right into the camera, but at least the peripheral vision, they're picking up, they're checking to whether they're still being filmed. And so I think that the guy who was, but people say, okay, why would they do that? What would be their purpose? Why would they show one of their own, pretend that he killed somebody when he actually didn't? Well, if the people at the very high up were wanting to federalize the police by showing that, look, these out of control local police, we got to put a stop to this. We need a federal oversight to run the whole show, and run it right from one central command center in Washington, D.C., then they might want to drum up fear about the local police to give themselves more creds, to get that done. So that's all there is for today. Have a great weekend and sleep well, friends.